Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for virtual Bulldogs Behind the Scenes, featuring an exclusive look of the first edition of the King James Bible. Well, my name is Molly Clevin, and I'm from the University of Minnesota Duluth Alumni Relations team. Today, we are going to take a peek at the first edition of the King James Bible, which was printed in 1611. We are fortunate to have Dr. Krista Sue-Lo Twu with us today. Dr. Twu, Associate Professor of English at UMD, received a PhD with specialty in medieval religious literature at the University of California, Irvine, and additional work in paleography, codicology, and medieval Latin at the University of Notre Dame. At UMD, Dr. Twu teaches courses on early British literature, Chaucer, Shakespeare, material book history and culture, King Arthur, and the history of the English language. In October 2016, she brought Shakespeare's first folio to UMD in collaboration with the Folger Shakespeare Library and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Her current research focuses on Boethius, Chaucer, and paleography, and she now serves as the president of the Duluth Interdisciplinary Chirographic Technology Association. It is now my pleasure to welcome and hand it over to Dr. Twu.
Hello. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited to be here. Today, we're looking at a text from the Ramseyer Northern Bible Society collection, which is housed here at the Catherine A. Martin Library at the University of Minnesota in Duluth. This collection contains more than 1,800 volumes in over 140 languages and includes texts from all the major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These texts carry the memories of those that own them and use them before. They preserve the historical record of families and communities, and they help us explore the past and make connections among the many threads of history: personal, spiritual, social, linguistic, literary, and material. This here is the Reverend Henry Ramsayer, for whom the collection is named. He served as the secretary of the Northern Bible Society from 1918 until his death in 1945. Reverend Ramsay came to Duluth, Minnesota in 1898, where he dedicated his life to ministering to the lumber and mining camps that were then developing in northern Minnesota, and also to the poor and homeless in Duluth. In 1918, he founded the Northern Bible Society, and in 1932, the society erected the Bible House for its headquarters. It had a book and Bible shop and a space for the public display of Reverend Ramsayer's private collection. Now the collection is at UMD. Here we can see the display cases where the students, where a lot of students across the disciplines use the collection to explore concepts in a variety of fields. With expert guidance from faculty members and the UMD Archivist, students also engage in collaborative experiential learning by curating displays using materials from the collection. Come take a look at their work on the fourth floor of the library sometime. You can see some of the rare and beautiful texts on display, a facsimile of many important texts from Bible history, as well as a number of beautiful original texts. We can see students work on many different things. This is a new acquisition, the St. John's Bible. It's a facsimile copy, but very, very beautiful, and will be available for study. Graduate students work on literary and also material analysis, as we can see, and both graduates and undergraduate students work on book history. This is a display from manuscript to print, and you can see some of these beautiful texts on display. Here is a facsimile of the Gutenberg Bible, and here is a facsimile of a Chaucer manuscript, a Thomas Aquinas original from 1490. Here is the beautiful, rare fourth edition of the Great Bible. And I hope that we'll be able to meet some more of these amazing books in this collection in future programs. We see a blank space, which is where I've plucked the 1611 King James Version. I want to go back here to a picture of a register of the volunteer founders. So you can see from the signatures, starting with Reverend Ramsay right at the top in January of 1920. UMD has housed this collection since 1979. Right, these are all the volunteer founders. And here we see that UMD's housed collection since 1979. And the register was donated to the Catherine A. Martin Library at UMD by the heirs of Daniel Munt in 2019. Now, Mr. Munt, whom you can see here, was a great friend of both the Bible Society and of UMD. And it's largely owed to his work with Mr. Don Pierce, the former UMD library director, that brought the collection here. So we're very grateful for his work and for the support of his family and the volunteer founders who did so much to collect this work. The Ramseyer collection began with this goal of demonstrating the history of the development of the Bible in English, but it has become so much more. Not only in illustrating the global phenomenon of scripture in translation, but also to be able to look at things in a long linguistic history sense and, of course, a literary sense as well. Texts have been contributed by the American Bible Society and the British and Foreign Bible Society, including some of these very rare and unusual editions. And of course, I would like to give tremendous thanks to Matt Rosendahl and Amy Brown, the UMD library director and the UMD archivist. The university is a collection of buildings that surround a library, and all of our work depends on a robust library and its staff so that we can do our work, our research, our teaching, all of the special experiential learning that we do in the archive. Thank you so much, Matt and Amy. I'm really, really obliged to you for making this great program happen. As we look at this special first edition King James Bible, before we look at the text itself, I'd like us to talk about what it was for, to understand why King James, not bishop, not theologian, why he wanted a new authorized edition. It helps to look back on how the monarch became the head of the Church of England. So here is Henry VIII, whom you probably know of as a somewhat psychotic murderer who did away with a bunch of his wives. Yes, he was a little bit murdery, and he did away with a lot of his wives. But it wasn't just because he was a psychopathic murderer. He had some good reasons too. I mean, in the sense that he had his reasons. I like to note that he was the second son of Henry VII. And if you've read your Shakespeare, especially your Richard III, you'll remember Henry VII as the fella who defeated Richard III in battle and established the Tudor dynasty. Well, his first son, he named Arthur, but Prince Arthur died in 1502. This was a great disappointment because, of course, Henry Tudor, Henry VII, was always a superb master of propaganda, and he really meant for his successor to be King Arthur, like the legendary king, right? To bring back the past into the present and usher in a glorious new age for England. So Henry, the younger brother here, he didn't know that he was going to become king. He wasn't trained to become king. He didn't have that much time after his brother died to get ready to be king. But when he did, he knew that his single most important duty was to produce a legitimate heir in order to avert the crisis in succession, such as the one that produced the recent civil wars that we call the Wars of the Roses. Right. So 6 marriages plus extracurriculars were all meant to produce an heir. We know that we start off with Catherine of Aragon, and she was the daughter of Isabel and Ferdinand. If you want to place yourself in history, right? She's the daughter of Isabel and Ferdinand, and she had 5 babies, but they were all either stillborn or they died as infants, except for Mary, who eventually did become queen, but only after, let's say, some other things. Henry VIII even had an actual son by his mistress, Catherine Blunt. And he, by then, was so desperate for a male heir that he was working with Parliament on legislation that would legitimate Henry Fitzroy so that he could be an heir. But then young Fitzroy died. Anne Boleyn, perhaps the most notorious of the wives, had 2 miscarriages and 1 daughter, the at the time very disappointing daughter Elizabeth, who became Elizabeth I, before she was executed for, well, essentially failing to produce an heir in 1536, at which point Henry segued right away in 1536 to marrying Jane Seymour, who finally produced that long-awaited male heir who became Edward VI. Now, Jane Seymour died soon after the birth of Edward from complications of childbirth, and Edward himself died at age 15. So he didn't rule long, but he was England's first king who was raised as a Protestant. Now, why he was raised as a Protestant and why there is a Church of England is directly a product of this problem of succession. The Church of England is a product of the crisis in succession. By 1531, Catherine had not produced a male heir. She was too ill to conceive again. Henry was frantic. The Catholic Church had denied Henry VIII an annulment of their marriage. And in his desperation, he repudiated the Pope and declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. I'd like to note that Henry VIII was a fairly devout Catholic, and he really didn't intend to break with the church so spectacularly. But once you do that, well, you know, the horses left the barn. He got the Archbishop Cranmer to void his marriage with Catherine and declared Mary illegitimate. This will have a lot of consequences down the road, because Catherine raised Mary as a devout Catholic, who then had particular reasons to despise Protestants. And this feature of the succession figured directly into the creation of the Geneva Bible some years later, which we'll talk about by and by. So when Mary succeeds the young dead Edward VI as monarch, she'll reinstate Catholicism and brutally persecute Protestants, earning herself the moniker Bloody Mary. Now, all this is happening in the age of early print. The printing press is developed in 1450 by Johannes Gutenberg, as you know. Its main innovation is movable type. They had what was called hand printing before, where you had to, with your hands, press a piece of paper onto a block of carved wood or metal. But a press like this could produce around 3,600 copies or pages per day, versus about the 40 that you could do by hand, or the several tops that you could manufacture by hand copying as a manuscript. The first text that Gutenberg printed was a Latin Vulgate Bible, and Bibles were always a strong market for manuscript texts as well as printed texts. I'd like to note that the Ramseyer collection has a facsimile of one of the Gutenberg Bibles, and I would love it if we could talk about that in another presentation. As we know, Queen Elizabeth I succeeded her sister Mary after Mary died. And I want to just point to this because it shows the reinstitution of the Church of England, with the monarch as the head of the Church of England, as well as the head of state. It's called the Pelican Portrait due to the jewel that she's wearing on her chest. You can see it's a tiny pelican. Elizabethans thought that the pelican would nourish its young with its own blood. And this image served to depict Elizabeth as the mother of the Church of England. In this portrait, we also see a variety of other symbols. In the upper left-hand corner, the Tudor rose. In the upper right-hand corner, the fleur de lis France. Her pearls are symbols of chastity. The cherries above her ear are symbols of virginity, and her red hair is a symbol of her fiery temperament. Elizabeth actually had painters emphasize the red hair. It became much redder in portraits as portrait history went along, because she really meant it about her fiery temperament and the trouble you'd be in if you crossed her. So her successor, as we know, if you call yourself the Virgin Queen, you better not have an actual child, right? Her successor was a nephew. And James I of England was already James VI of Scotland. Now, this becomes important in the story of the King James Bible, because James was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. And there's been quite a lot of films recently about the terrible conflicts between the Scottish and the English at this time. So you probably already know that Mary, Queen of Scots was one of England's #1 enemies. She was Catholic. She was married to the King of France. They were at war. Elizabeth had her executed. Now, James was taken away from Mary when he was only about 18 months old and raised separately, raised Protestant in the Church of Scotland. But when he became King of England, there was a great deal of anxiety about what kind of a king he would be. Would he be a Scottish king? Would he be an English king? How would he be a king of both? And would he be sympathetic to many of the Scottish ministers who he had grown up with, not all of whom were Protestant? So we see that he was a very careful manipulator of his own royal iconography. He developed this device that you see, half a thistle and half a rose, topped by a crown, to describe how he is both the King of England and of Scotland. And he brought these two flags. We see the English cross of St. George on the left, and the white psalter of St. Andrew's. A psalter is a cross that's on its side, over blue background on the right, and gave us the Union flag. Note that this is 100 years before there was actually a union of the kingdoms, right? There was no such thing as the United Kingdom of Great Britain until 1707 and 1708. And you're probably also saying, shouldn't there be another red psalter on that cross? Well, that flag that we know of today as Union Jack, it doesn't appear until 1800, when the Act of Union merged the kingdoms of Great Britain and Ireland. So the red psalter cross St. Patrick is added in 1801. Now, everybody hated this, right? I mean, they did not like this at all. James kept saying, hath he not made us all one island, compressed with one sea, and of itself by nature indivisible? The House of Commons said, no, in fact, it did not. And it rebuffed all of James's demands to be titled King of Great Britain on legal grounds. So, it didn't fly. It's not just that the English didn't want it, the Scottish didn't want it either. And when he started making these flags, they even told him, you can't fly this flag on your palace. You can't fly this flag on solid ground. You can put it on your actual flagship at sea. But they didn't like it. They didn't like this union flag. The Scottish even well, if you've got to use it, maybe the white cross of St. Andrew should be on top. So we see the Scottish proposal for the flag. He worked on other ways to produce this unity. He titled himself in 1603, James I, King of England, France, and Ireland, defender of the faith, as well as James VI of Scotland. He produced this, he started this process, this project in 1604 at the Hampton Court Conference to devise a new authorized version for the Church of England. Now that he was the head of the Church of England, he was going to make it his church. James was also a theologian in some ways. That is to say, he was a political theologian, and he wrote books. He wrote books about how God governs the monarchy. He believed in the divine right of kings. He promoted the idea of the divine right of kings, and that resistance to a monarch was tantamount to heresy. And so treason and heresy become the same gesture in his theories, in his treatises, and those who practiced any resistance against the king, he imagined them to be in league with Satan and witches. So he actually wrote a whole book about witches too, called The Daemonology. At any rate, you can see then how this political ambition led to this type of religious ambition to make the church one in his own image. Now, here's the frontispiece from the King James Version. Our version has lost its frontispiece because it's a bit wonky, shall we say. We'll get to see it up close and personal in just a moment. But I know you would want to look at the frontispiece. This is from the Dewey Library at the University of Pennsylvania. And I wanted to show it because many scholars talk about it as a crystallization of the theology of this text. At the top, I'm going to tell you what you're looking at too. How's this? At the top, you see a representation of Trinity. The very top, you'll see some Hebrew letters. That is the Tetragrammaton, right? It spells out Yahweh. The Son is down in the medallion with the lamb and the cross on it. And in between them, you have the Holy Spirit in the form of the dove. At that level, at the top, under the sun and the moon, you see the 12 apostles, plus Judas in the far right corner, who's turned away. Below them, you see 12 heraldic devices that symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And they rest on niches that show Moses on the left and Aaron on the right. Right? Moses holding the tablets of law, and Aaron, who is the first of the priesthood, who represents the priesthood. In the corners, the gospel writers sit with their symbolic animals. From the upper left, you have Mark with the winged man, Mark with the winged lion. Matthew with the winged man, Mark with the winged lion, down to the bottom, Luke with the winged ox, and John with the winged eagle. The pelican, we see the pelican again at the bottom medallion, is feeding her young, representing Christian self-sacrifice. And of course, from helping us remember how Elizabeth I fashioned herself the mother of the church and how James is her heir. So the text itself there reads, the Holy Bible, containing the Old Testament and the New, newly translated out of the original tongues, with the former translations diligently compared and revised by His Majesty's special commandment, appointed to be read in churches, imprinted at London by Robert Barker, printer to the King's Most Excellent Majesty, Anno Domini 1611. Right. So this is an image about unity, about the Old Testament and the New Testament working in harmony, right? The old regime, the new regime, all in harmony, right? All together. And here is our version. You can see it's enormous. And the first flyleaf here shows some ownership marks, right? There's Cornelius Horsington, his book, written the year 1719 to 20. There's a lot of damage to our copy, mainly in the head matter. Now, let's pause. This is a table and a calendar expressing the order of the Psalms and the lessons to be said at morning. It really, all this front matter really expresses the notion that this was a book for churches. You notice the size. This is not a book that you can easily curl up with, you know, in bed, or I don't know, all the places we read books now. We sit in our sofas and we read books, or read in bed, or dare I say, occasionally in the bathtub for a particularly luxurious read. But no, that would be very, very difficult with this gigantic book that weighs, you know, close to 20 pounds and is fully folio sized. You notice it's really big. It's like the size of a big dictionary. So, you know, it's authorized to read in churches. All the front matter is about what you use it for in churches. It's meant to be displayed, and it's meant to, you know, to help priests. It has useful things like a calendar of, well, not really a calendar, but a chart that helps you calculate the date of Easter forever, right? Here on this page, you can also see how James put his own mark on it. You can see from left to right, the repeating symbols of the rose of England, the thistle of Scotland, the fleur-de-lis of France, and the harp of Ireland. You're like, France, really? They didn't really rule France, but they did still own Calais. The harp, I mean, the fleur-de-lis is a bit of a hangover from the 100 Years' Wars, when they thought they maybe could get the whole thing. It didn't work out. So, you know, we can see a lot from this particular, just, you know, almost, you know, just small decorative element. Now, I know what you're thinking right now. You've probably been listening to me and yet still thinking, she's touching that book with her bare hands. Oh no. Also, my hands are a mess, but you know, when you work with paper. Yes, I'm touching the book with my bare hands. That is the practice. You're like, but the white gloves, shouldn't you be protecting the book? The current practice, best practice, is clean hands. We wash our hands before we touch the book. We wash our hands after, because we actually have to protect ourselves from the books too. You know, they printed those things with lead type, and who knows what was in the ink. So clean hands at all times. The white gloves actually put you in more danger of damaging the paper, because the fibers in the gloves can catch on the fibers in the paper. And you can see at that top edge that there are a lot of fibers to catch on. So that your next question is, okay, What does it feel like? Like, what does it feel like to touch a 400-year-old book? The pages are soft. They're soft because they're made out of old clothes. The printing process itself, it brought the cost of books way down. If we think about books, and I would love to give a talk about the history of books, but books, manuscripts, they used to be printed on parchment, which is made out of sheep. So a book this size, it would have taken 200 sheepskins, right? 200 sheep had to die to make a medieval Bible. But this is made out of paper. And whereas a medieval Bible that had to be handwritten could take years to produce, this could be produced quickly, within a year even. This first printing of 1611, they made perhaps 1,500 or 2,000 copies in a year. It was exponentially faster and therefore cheaper. But the paper was still the most important and the most expensive component. And they're made out of old recycled clothes. Clothes were the most expensive item that normal everyday people would own. They were more expensive than your furniture. They were more expensive than your cart. They were the single most expensive item because everything had to be hand done, right? If you were making linen fabrics like this, like the clothes that went into this Bible, you'd have to grow the flax, you'd have to wet the flax, card it, right? Clean it, card it, spin it, weave it, cut it, stitch it, everything by hand. Or the opposite with wool, with sheep, right? And of course, flax was not even really an English product. This flax probably came from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland was the place to get flax back in the day. England was the place to get wool. So, it even shows the touches of this nascent empire, right? All right. So it is soft and very, very beautiful, very durable. It has no chemicals, no bleach in it. You can see these great genealogies. These are all the begats of the Old Testament, right? Again, this front matter really helps us use the Bible. Here is the book of Genesis. And again, we see these royal symbols, right? The rose and the thistle. We also see, so we also see a mixture of fonts here. At the top there, right there, you see what's called humanist font, and then the main text is in what we call Gothic or black letter, right? And up here, look at that little squiggly holes. That is bookworm, right? If you ever wondered what a bookworm was, it's a little worm that eats through your pages. And yet, they would eat through your clothes too if you stayed still long enough, right? I'll just say, like, the clothes, like the clothness of this, it's really hard to oversell how expensive clothes and books were. You may have heard the phrase, he lost the shirt off his back, right? And he was gambling, lost the shirt off his back. It's because the shirts were worth money and people would take your clothes to settle your debts, right? So here, again, we see beautiful decorative, royal decorative elements and the Psalms. Now, I have us turn to the Psalms to talk a little bit about the literary beauty of this. A lot of times people ask me, did Shakespeare write the King James Version? I heard Shakespeare wrote the King James Version. No, Shakespeare did not write the King James Bible, but the folks that did translate this text, they were very influenced by Shakespeare. By 1611, Shakespeare's writing career was almost over. Remember, he dies in 1616. And we think The Tempest is a product of about 1611. And The Tempest was the last play that we think Shakespeare wrote alone. He continued to write a little bit with collaborators, but The Tempest, 1610, 1611 was really his last solo play. James I was a writer himself, right? And not just those political treatises I mentioned. He also wrote poetry and books about poetry. He was very, very interested in the rhetorical beauty of his work. And of course, the rhetorical beauty of this Bible. He was a writer and he was going to have the text that he authorized be beautiful. So when we look at the Psalms are just a great, lovely example of this. Right? And again, we see the way that the type is laid out. And we turn to, or I like to turn to Psalm 23. It's a favorite of mine. And we're gonna check that out, right? And pause on it right there. Can we go back to some? I hope it's clear enough for you to read it along with me, right? This is Psalm 23. It's a very famous psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rib and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So it's just a beautiful poem. You can see very clearly here some of the nice touches of the text itself. The way that the black letter font uses these long S's, again, because short S's, so we see two types. If you look at it, says Saul period XXIII, right? Psalm 23. That's what we call a short S in a humanist or a Roman capital typeface, followed underneath by that humanist typeface, where it says David's confidence in God's grace. And again, you see the short S at the end of David's confidence. But then in the black letter type, it says it looks like a psalm of David, but it's a psalm. And that long S saves you just a little bit of paper, because like I said, paper is expensive and it was traditional. That Gothic font, that black letter font, was actually something of a religious statement. It puts it in line with those medieval Bibles. Okay. Here, and when I say, those medieval Bibles, I mean those medieval Latin Bibles. It hadn't even been 150 years since the constitutions of Oxford had made Bibles in translation illegal. So this is a major statement. These early authorized Bibles and their use of black letter font is a major statement about the status of the English language up next to Latin. Okay. So here we have a leaf that's opposite the Gospels, right, where the New Testament starts, where the Horsington family has written its records. And I wanted to point to this, and we can roll down it, because we see that Cornelius Horsington acquired the book and wrote his name in it in 1719. And we see all these Horsingtons, births, deaths, marriages, yep, and some nice decoration that last all the way to the 1790s. So what we see from that is that, yes, the Horsingtons got this Bible and they used it like a family Bible. And they used it for 100 years. 100 years, this family kept it, loved it, guarded it, put themselves into its pages. But we also see that from, its printing in 1611 to where, Cornelius Horsington got it in 1719, there was 100 years that it was not a family Bible. So in conclusion, I want to say that while we have tremendous regard for the King James Bible, at the time, people did not. It was very, very slow to get adopted by regular people for their own personal devotion. First of all, as we see, it wasn't really meant for it. And second of all, it was super unwieldy. It's enormous. It's just this enormous book. So, why didn't they? Well, because they already had Bibles. I just want to point here to the competition, right? This is the Geneva Bible, and I really want to do one of these on the Geneva Bible because our collection has many, many Geneva Bibles. It's called Geneva because it was created by these English Protestants that were living in exile in Geneva during the reign of Queen Mary I, right? Her Bloody Mary's executions, they drove about 800 English scholars over to Europe. And a lot of them gathered in Geneva, where they listened to John Calvin, and they got kind of radicalized, and they translated a Bible themselves, right, from Hebrew and Greek, based on the Tyndale translation, which Tyndale, by the way, had been executed by Queen Mary for, essentially writing the Bible. So a lot of what we see, a lot of the things that we saw in this first edition King James Bible actually owe themselves to the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible was the first study Bible, right? If you noticed when we scrolled over those pages, the chapter and verse numbers, the Geneva was the first Bible to put these chapters and verse. The genealogies, the marginal notes, the study aids, commentary, the illustrations, genealogies, tables, maps even, those were innovated by the Geneva Bible. Furthermore, this Bible came in little books. They were small. You can hold them in your hand because they were quarto and octavo sized, not just folio sized as that big book is. And therefore, because they used so much less paper, they were cheap. A Geneva New Testament costs less than a week's wages for even the lowest paid laborers. And low paid laborers used it. Cromwell's army took it into the field with them. It was called the Soldier's Bible. The Puritan settlers to the Americas brought it with them on the Mayflower. But don't think it's just the Puritan Bible. It's not. Normal people, Anglicans used it, read it, had it. It was Shakespeare's family's Bible, right? In contrast, the King James Bible cost 10 shillings just for the paper parts. If you wanted it bound, which, I mean, seriously, you're not gonna You're not just going to have it like that. They put it in a binding for you for an additional 2 to 5 shillings. So, it was very expensive. Just so you know, infantry soldiers only earned 5 pence per day, right? 12 pence in a shilling. So really expensive. Now, at a certain point, James was like, yeah, but maybe we should all have one of these. So he banned the printing and the sale of Geneva Bibles because they were very literally the competition. Between 1616 and 1625, it was not legal to print Geneva Bibles, or to sell or to buy them. However, Robert Barker, being an enterprising person, and honestly, you couldn't sell enough King James Bibles, even at 10 shillings a piece plus 2 to 5 for the binding, to A, satisfy demand, and B, make the kind of living that Robert Barker wanted to make. So he kept printing Geneva Bibles, but he put a spurious date of 1599, as well as his father's name on them. So we have one of these spurious 1599 texts, and you can see here that it says 1599. It was almost surely printed between 1616 and 1625. To show you, though, that they gave up a lot when they clung to this. Just wanted to show you the first few lines of that psalm. Right? You can see how small it is, right? It fits in your hands, right? So just a teaser for next time, right? We have one that's from 1595. The Psalms were such a big deal that they were the last piece that people adopted, even though I think they're one of the most beautiful literary achievements of the King James Bible. We can see in this 1599 edition that they actually sewed in a 1643 Psalms, right? It's just a book of Psalms got sewn into it because people wore out their Psalms. Most of these Geneva Bibles have a book of Psalms at the beginning, like before the text of the Bible proper starts, and they got one in the middle, and then this one's got one at the end too. So, it's a contrast to how we think of the beauty of the King James Psalms, and why obviously you just want to use them. But that's history for you, full of unexpected surprises. Anyway, I hope we get to look at some of these other books again soon. Thank you for your attention, for coming to this. And I think that we'll open things up to questions, and Molly's probably got some things to say again.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Twu, for that presentation on such an important piece of history. We are now going to transition to our question and answer. So we are going to flip our cameras on here and we'll get started. There she is. All right. Well, our first question is a follow-up question wondering what the cost of producing this version would be in today's economy, knowing that it's 10 shillings plus 2 shillings. What would that translate in today's money? Oh, and you are muted, Krista.
Okay. Today's money, it's hard to express what that would be for today's money. It would be, so 10 shillings. I think of these things in terms of what people made. So an infantry soldier earned 5 pence a day, right? A cavalry officer earned 2 shillings a day, right? So think of your salary of, say, a white collar manager, right? The cavalry officer of of our modern office jockeys. 2 shillings, that's a whole day's pay. Think of what, an officer in the army would make today. 2 shillings. Now multiply that by 5. And that's how much that book would cost. Right. So it's still probably, hundreds and hundreds of dollars in today's money. But today, of course, we have not only wood pulp paper, industrialized processes for making it, laser printing. We don't think of books at the same cost. And even at hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a book, it's still so cheap compared to what a manuscript used to cost. When you think about a medieval Bible that was hand drawn and hand decorated on parchment, medieval kings used to pay like what would amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money. We have the record of some sales of Bibles from the 14th, 13th century, and they cost as much as a house. Right. I mean, this is why people used to chain books up onto the libraries, because they were very, very valuable. Right. But, you can buy a 1611 King James Bible, right? It's 1611 edition. And it's indeed a facsimile. I think it costs about $30. So there's several ways to answer that, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thanks. And I know that we're just running a little short on time, and I can kind of see something in the background and wondering if you could share that.
Yeah. This, my friends, this is the book. This is the King James Bible. And it's, in case you're wondering, when I say it's enormous and you wouldn't want to curl up in bed with it, I mean, okay, maybe you would want to curl up in bed with it, but it'd be highly huggable. or maybe I just have strange ideas about what to take to bed with me. But this is it. I don't dare open it without an actual, book rest, because we do take care of these things. But I do hope that you'll come and see it, because it is often on display on the 4th floor of the library.
And just out of curiosity, how much do you think that weighs?
I think it weighs at least 20 pounds. It's really quite a beast. I think some of them are a little bit lighter because of how they've been kept and stored. But paper and parchment will absorb water by and by, and so become microscopically heavier over hundreds of years. And this has been rebound into, a heavy board binding, but some of them are slightly finer bindings, and those can be a little bit lighter. So I would say between 15 and perhaps just over 20 pounds is the average weight of King James Bible.
Wow. Do you know what the dimensions are of the Bible?
Originally, it would be a little bit bigger. So here's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So you can see it's probably like 10 or 11 by 16. But because it's been rebound, it's been made a little bit smaller. Every time you rebind a book, they take a thing and they sand down the edges to make them smooth again. And that means that you lose a little bit of paper. So, you can see, how it's been ground down so that some of the text goes right to the edge now.
Well, Krista, do you have to schedule an appointment to view this collection, or is it open for all community members to stop in when they have a chance?
If you would like to get up close and personal with this collection, you do have to schedule an appointment, but many of the most beautiful volumes, and the oldest ones at the moment at least, are on public display on the 4th floor of the library, where my students have put up, they've curated exhibits of them for very particular purposes. So you'll be able to see this. This is going back in its case, where you can see it and read what my students have to say about it. It's really amazing the way that students respond to these texts, and the way that it sparks a new appreciation of these technologies of reading and writing. So I hope you come for the books, but stay for the students, right?
Perfect. Well, and I know we are out of time now, but hopefully we're able to do another one of these with the Geneva and focus on that a little bit and do a deeper dive. But thank you so much, Dr. Twu, there it is, taking the time and providing us that fascinating history. If you are not an alum and you're tuning in and you would like to be added to our email list, please email us at alumni@d.umn.edu, and we will send you more invitations for events like this. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Twu, and hopefully we'll see you all online again. Bye.
Thank you.